Let us state your proposition in the form of a syllogism and proceed logically. Major premise: in its advancement, mind will secure to itself the conditions most favorable to its expansion. Minor premise: but wealth is most favorable to the expansion of the mind. Conclusion: it is therefore by the aid of wealth that the human mind has advanced to its present wonderful stage of development. Is this a fair and logical statement of the proposition? I admitted that it was. Very well, then I dispute your minor premise and deny your conclusion, said my host positively. Wealth is not favorable to the expansion of the mind, and for its wonderful development it acknowledges no financial obligation whatsoever. Under the patronage of wealth, which was to be the gainer by its product, mind has wrought some of its most beautiful creations, and in modern times wealth has supplied in some instances tools to facilitate its work, but in the main, money has rather been the enemy of mind, and wealth, whether supporting monarchical extravagance, religious bigotry, or personal vanity and ambition, has tended to suppress rather than promote the highest and noblest qualities of the human mind. Its sublimest efforts have been achieved in poverty, in exile, in dungeons even, and as for scaling walls impregnable and climbing heights inaccessible, and planting beacon lights for others, as per your pretty figure, the most gifted men have gone to the stake or scaffold, because power, which has always been synonymous with wealth, did not approve. I began to get warm in the collar, for though I had engaged in the discussion more for information than argument, the ease and skill with which my opponent had met and defeated me at every point, aroused all of the belligerency of my nature. But what made it more exasperating too, the ladies seemed to be deeply interested listeners and caught every point. Since you have appealed to Caesar, said I, unto Caesar will we go. If you resort to logic, I will meet you with your own weapon and state another syllogism for you to disprove. Major premise: in all times wealth and power have been used to repress and retard the development of the mind. Minor premise: but it is in the nature of mind to resist oppression, and its mightiest energies have been aroused in this resistance. Conclusion: therefore wealth and power have unwittingly contributed to the development and expansion of the mind. Very neatly turned, cried the professor, while the ladies smiled, and Miss Helen even infringed the neutrality laws by clapping her hands. Then your position, continued my host, is that everything which opposes the advancement of the mind really facilitates its development. Not precisely. Everything which arouses the resistance and overcoming instinct of the mind, I returned. The point is well taken and strongly stated, conceded the professor. But, what wealth and power has contributed to the development of the mind by such direct oppression as to arouse resistance and wake its slumbering energies, is slight in comparison with the blight and stagnation induced by war, financial oppression, and industrial wrongs. You charge these things to wealth then? I do, most unqualifiedly, responded my host. Homer would have us believe that the Trojan War was fought for love, but the wars of history have been for wealth and power. I make the point on you, I returned, that the poorest nations have been the least intelligent, and that industrial wrongs have always been greatest where ignorance has been grossest. I think that history will sustain me in the further assertion, that war has been the great civilizer of the world. Incontrovertible statements, all, asserted my opponent, and incorrect only as they confuse cause and effect. If the poorest nations have been the least intelligent, they were the poorest because they were the least intelligent, and not unintelligent because they were poor. If industrial wrongs have been greatest where ignorance has been most dense, it is simply because the people, being ignorant, were least able to defend themselves against industrial wrongs. If civilization has been a product of war, it is a byproduct and resulted because, notwithstanding the barbarity and inhumanity of the wars, they brought different peoples together, and the knowledge of different nations, by amalgamation, was enlarged. War itself is debasing to the human mind. I take issue with you on that, said I hotly. War may be destructive, but it is not debasing. War may be cruel, but cruelty calls forth nobility. War may make widows and orphans, but it also makes heroes, and liberty and patriotism have been fructified by all the blood the earth has ever drunk. And what has been the liberty of the world, my friend asks scornfully, but the illusion which people cherish when they have exchanged one set of masters for another? And what is the patriotism of the world but that savage and senseless prejudice which is cultivated by teaching the fools of nation to hate the fools of other nations? And when the fools of two nations have been set by the ears by their rulers, they tight and maim and kill, and this is called glorious war. I beg a truce, I cried, seeing that my venerable host felt deeply on the subject, while I was merely endeavoring to hold up my end of the argument. I find that I am no match for you iron republicans. I have only encountered these accomplished ladies, yourself and Professor Hallam, and on the subjects of dress, industrial economy, and music I find that I know nothing, am eliminated, obliterated. In other words, to use an Americanism, I am not in it, and hereby surrender, foot horse and dragoons. I cannot offer you my sword, for I presume there is no such thing in this model republic. They were all beaten into plowshares long since, answered my friend smiling good-humoredly, so that formality will have to be dispensed with. I am generous though in victory, and will pay you the compliment to say that if your cause was worthy of your prowess, the result might be different. In all contests though, the justice of a cause is not less an element of strength than the greatness of cannon and sharpness of steel. I bowed my acknowledgment of the compliment and indulged the hope that I might yet find some vulnerable point in the Iron Republic, if for nothing else than to redeem myself in the fair eyes that had witnessed my discomfiture. I think you are entirely too magnanimous in professing defeat, said Miss Morris, taking part in the conversation for the first time and looking at me with her beautiful eyes beaming with interest. If you are not too proud to accept an humble ally, I bowed again. I venture to suggest that the enemy, smiling and flashing a glance at her father, may attribute his victory, if indeed he has won it, to the fact that the fighting was all in his own territory where he was entrenched. It is my opinion, if I am worthy to be admitted to a council of war, that you run up the white flag too soon. With the glorious prospect such a promising alliance opens up to me, I replied facetiously but with a peculiar thrill of gratification. I hasten to pull down the flag of defeat and beg that you will advance into the breach. Well said, my fair ally. I reopened the attack by the assertion that it was not alone in bringing the nations into closer intercourse that war has exerted a civilizing and elevating influence on the human mind. I believe that the highest and noblest thoughts of the peaceful present owe their origin to the high and noble deeds of a past made glorious by war. Tut! Tut! Exclaimed her father, the romances of history and Sir Walter Scott have corrupted your mind. Kindled rather, retorted my ally with a vigor that proved she was in earnest. I acknowledge my indebtedness to history and Sir Walter, and when I read of the deeds of Coeur de Lion and Ivanhoe, even of Dalgety and de Bracy, I cannot abide the goodliness of a big nation like this that works and eats and slumbers like an ox. What would be the history of the world today if the Iron Republic had been founded on the Babylonian Empire and its principles had received worldwide acceptances? Try to think of a history of the world without an Alexander or Caesar or Frederick the Great or Bonaparte or Washington. Without a Marathon or Thermopylae, without Crusades or Coeur de Lion. I was surprised at the energy with which these words were uttered, and suspected that the strong feeling that prompted them must have been long repressed. My host looked astonished, and Mrs. Morris turned to her daughter with a glance of concern, as though she had suddenly discovered in her traces of insanity. The history of the world, my dear, said her father after a moment's silence, we may not alter or amend, and perhaps would not if we could. It is with the world's life as with a man's. The excesses, dissipations, and sins of early years cannot be blotted out, and the experience of them may even serve to enhance the virtues of maturer age. Sometimes such experiences become the foundation of a nobler and more purposeful life, and then they may be recalled without regret. but it is a poor life that does not improve with age, and the world's life will be unrounded and incomplete if it is not profited by the knowledge and experience of the past. It is not in me to controvert these words so seriously and truly spoken, but with my new ally, I was in the predicament of the man in the Indian fable, who made an alliance with the tiger and found, after he had bound himself with thongs to that unconquerable beast, that he could not run away when he would. "I trust you will not be angry with me, father, if I seem to dispute with you," replied Miss Helen with unyielding firmness, "but can that have been wholly bad in the past, which is the source of all that is most beautiful in the present? What is the inspiration of poetry and all great thoughts but the high deeds which you impute to the recklessness of the world's youth? War is cruel, but does not its very cruelty provoke nobler sacrifices, as Mr. Barrington has said, and a more exalted heroism than the piping herdsman of Utopia ever dreamed of? And may it not be in the plan of creation that sunshine and storm, tears and laughter, love and hate, war and peace, shall alternate like day and night to the end of time?" "My daughter," answered her father gravely, "I am grieved at the low estimation in which you seem to hold your country, and that condition which has been the desire of the ages, but you are entitled to your opinions, and I would not have you repress them in deference to me. It is my faith, though, that the plan of creation contemplates the ultimate elimination of hate and strife and all evil whatsoever. And though he may not appeal to youth and a romantic imagination, the piping herdsman of Utopia, who tends his flocks and lives in peace, with clean hands and an upright heart, is to me a nobler example of God's creation than any medieval swashbuckler that ever drew sword or broke lance to win the silly fancy of a foolish lady love. To my mind, Professor Hallam, who would walk around a block rather than tread upon a worm, is a greater man than Coeur de Lion ever was, from every intelligent point of view." "It may be wrong and wicked," cried the beautiful woman vehemently, with flashing eyes and flushed face, "and if it is, I can't help it and I don't care, but I am tired to death of this dreary monotony of peace and prosperity, and the ring of a spearhead upon a breastplate or the clash of swords in a glorious cause would make sweeter music for me than all the piping herdsmen of Utopia or all the fiddlers of Ironia, for that matter," and bursting into tears she rose hastily from the table and left the room. "Well, I'll declare," exclaimed my host, pushing back his chair. "Who can solve the female enigma?" I could not, but the one under consideration had gratified me exceedingly by her strange conduct, though I could not tell exactly why. It is said that women are past finding out, and I have never been a careful investigator. But without understanding it, the contemptuous reference to the fiddlers of Ironia braced me up immensely. With a woman's penetration, probably Mrs. Morris saw further into the matter than any of us, and saying something about girls' heads being filled with romance, she left the table also and followed her daughter from the room. The meal had been concluded some time before, and as Miss Morris' unexpected denouement, if the word may be used here, had very naturally put an end to the conversation, my host led the way and we adjourned to the library. 10 or 15 minutes after leaving the dining room we were made aware by the ringing of a gong that the carriage had arrived, and looking out I saw a handsome vehicle with 2 seats besides the driver's, standing at the door. My host called for the ladies and they came down immediately. Miss Helen blushed as she entered the room, and approaching her father with downcast eyes, kissed him on the cheek. "How now, my young renegade, what means this treason to your country?" he exclaimed, holding her face between his hands and looking at her with mock severity. "It simply means that the country is all right, ma père, but that I am not ready for the millennium," she replied, smiling faintly, and with that she turned on me a glance that made my heart bound, and I mentally snapped my fingers at the fiddlers of Ironia. There was something in that glance which said plainer than words, that there was a bond between us and the alliance would be continued. She was attired for the drive in a blue flannel gown buttoned to the throat like an English riding habit, with jaunty cap, and gloves to match. Her mother was similarly dressed in a dark